So I recently heard Robert Pires say this about Thierry Henry.
A lot of people talk about Ronaldo, the Brazilian. Yeah, I agree when the people say he's one of the best strikers, but this guy, for me, is like Ronaldo. He have everything. He was a perfect striker, left, right, strong, quick, and with the ball. And he scored a lot of goals.
And I agree. I think it's weird that Ronaldo is placed on such a mythical, untouchable pedestal when I think Henry had a similar skill set and reached a similar peak level. In fact, I find that Henry, despite being widely acknowledged as the best Premier League player of all time, is just generally underrated when you look at like a broader scale, because he is one of the best players of all time and he has a very good claim to being the best striker of all time, but he's rarely given those shouts with a ton of conviction and gusto. You know, it always feels like there's a caveat. Like if someone were to say, I think Henry is the best striker of all time, it's kind of likely they would be laughed at. Like, TT's great, but let's be real, come on. R9, Van Basten, way better. But there's no actual reason he shouldn't have a strong claim or at least have a debate about it. Other than like the narratives or the stories or the reputation he's established hasn't quite rubber stamped him in that bracket.
Like, I am a true believer that from 01 to 06, on a median, Henry was the best player in the world. I think in a median. Not like if you're on the same pitch. I never think a day in my time that he was better than Zidane, right? Or Ronaldinho.
So that's like the casual normie opinion, right? And I completely disagree. I think this opinion is based on a faulty foundation. I think peak-wise, he was absolutely on their level, if not even better. And it got me thinking, like, where does that perceived gap come from? Is it because he wasn't a prodigy, like he wasn't a freak at 17? Or is he actually just ability-wise worse than these guys? So I'm going to get in-depth into all that by mostly analyzing Henry's skill set in comparison to that of Ronaldo's. But first, let me just glaze a little. Let me set up some foundation by just establishing some stuff. And for that, I want you to listen to what Cesc Fabregas has to say about Henry, because this really resonated with me and I think he hit the mark perfectly.
Best forward that you've played with? Forward, I'm going to go with Thierry Henry. Thierry, I think, together with Lionel Messi, they are the two players that I felt much stronger when I was on a football pitch. It's like saying, okay, this could not be my day, the team could not play well, etc. But you know you will always have Thierry Henry there to save the day. There were games that the later part of my career, let's say the last 8 to 10 years, I didn't feel that any game was easy. But also with Thierry, it's difficult to explain because I don't want it to sound weird or arrogant or anything, but I just felt I knew we were going to win. That was the power of me seeing Thierry there, and I only felt it with him and Leo. He was so dominant. I mean, when he was on his day, and even when he was not sometimes, he was unstoppable. I mean, some defenders and big defenders and great defenders, they didn't really know what to do with him.
Okay, you can find loads of great quotes like this. What made this so interesting? What was different about this? Well, there's a few things. I mean, firstly, Fabregas has played with a lot of great players. Neymar, Hazard, Xavi, Iniesta, Torres, Villa. And he basically just said that after Messi, Henry was the guy he played with. But also, I completely relate with Cesc in that nobody quite gave me the feeling Henry did, the power he exuded, the gravity, the sense of pure direct threat other than Messi. And that's because for about 2 or 3 years, Henry had a level of athleticism that was so off the scale, it genuinely felt like at any moment he could pick the ball up in his own half, run past everyone and score in 3 seconds. And that feeling was so unique to him. Now, I could show you the goals he scored doing that. He famously did it against Real Madrid and Tottenham and Liverpool, but those are already really well known and I don't want to get hit with copyright issues. But the lack of good Henry highlights on YouTube, I think, doesn't capture just how often he did this kind of thing. It wasn't a one-off. And he would try and do it and come close like once every couple of weeks. He would just go on an insane run that nobody else in the world could do. Of him essentially just bulldozing past entire teams from his own half that didn't even necessarily lead to anything, but just the capability, the capacity that he could do it on a consistent basis was crazy. Like, genuinely, just look at where he's picking up the ball and how much of a direct goal threat he is.
He's got virtually the entire Spurs defence to take on here. He's capable of doing it. There's one gone. There's another. There's another. Unbelievable. Bergkamp.
And he's not just ball pushing past 1 or 2 players, he's dribbling past 3 or 4. I can't think of anyone who did that with such regularity other than Messi. And even he, and look, Messi was undoubtedly a better player, but even he generally had to be closer to goal to pose that direct threat. And it's not just me saying that through selective clips here. Like, commentators and pundits at the time would talk about this.
Henry, now he could score from here. He could score from White Hart Lane.
Okay, do you know how mad that is? To pick the ball up there, and people are saying, you know, he could score.
There are hardly any footballers in the history of the game who have the capability of picking up the ball in their defensive third, going from the defensive third into the middle third, into the attacking third, and scoring at the other end. I don't even think Pele was able to do that.
I legit don't think people realize what he was doing so regularly. Like, all these clips came from like a 2-year time span. I could literally be sat here showing clips for the next hour. And it's not just the fact that he could carry the ball by himself 60 meters and be a direct goal threat that made him scary. It's the fact that he was capable of that and defenders knew it, and the fear factor that brought on that made him even scarier, because he had the intelligence and the vision to pick apart the spaces that would open up.
Casi imposible frenar a este jugador cuando está en carrera.
He had an aura about him that defenders were scared of, so they would sort of not let him have the ball, but they'd think, well, you know, this is Thierry Henry, so what he's going to do with it. He sort of commanded respect, and he got it from players who played against him because he was so good.
You know, people talk about aura. No one captures that word more than Henry. Like, he had a glow around him where people were scared to get near him, and that would open up spaces that he was good enough and clever enough to exploit. Man, I make him sound so robotic and functional saying this, but as though he didn't have like an insane amount of flair coming out of his butt. Like, he was so unpredictable and his brain worked so fast. He would just do like mad stuff at times. I mean, he could just randomly bang one in from 30 yards as well. So how do you defend this guy? Like, everyone who watches him regularly comes to that conclusion. Like, he is impossible to defend.
Teams were absolutely terrified of him, and there was 7 or 8 different ways he could effectively score a goal against you. Like, in its most basic sense, imagine you are marking Thierry Henry and he pulls away from you and drops sort of into the space behind the midfield. Like, do you go with him? Because if you do, he might get the ball and just literally sprint past you and score a goal. But if you don't go with him, he'll just crack in a shit pinger from about 30 yards.
We have this argument on this show seemingly every Monday. If you're a defender, how do you play against him, Andy?
He had this crazy ability to just like freeze defenders. He'd slow the game down, lull them a little bit, and then just skip past. Almost at will. Like, he was so superior, so dominant. It felt like he was just toying with these professionals. You'd see it especially when he wanted time waste. I know I keep harping on this, but I haven't seen anyone establish such a psychological and physical dominance over other players like this.
I've never seen any player like traumatize as much defenders as him. He actually killed so many defenders' confidence. His style, his speed, his arrogance as well. His style was really disturbing a lot of defenses.
Phenomenal. The way when he stops players like he did there, I think it was a Stephen Taylor, he just stops and watch this. You think you're told keep the ball moving at all times, watch, stops, and then he's away. And there's nothing anyone can do about it.
Alright, so most people know that clip of Ronaldinho doing keepy-uppies and flicking it up over dudes' heads, right? But Henry did something similar, right? So he's doing keepy-uppies, and he doesn't quite have the mastery over the ball that Ronaldinho does, and he just bangs it up in the air so high that he has to go chasing it, and he gets there and like shields the ball so easily. Like, the defenders around him just start scattering. Like, who just kicks the ball in the air across the face of goal to themselves, gets there, and every defender's scared to touch him. And by the way, I think it's understated just how far ahead statistically Henry was compared to his peers. You need to keep in mind that the 2000s was a lower scoring era than the 2010s for a lot of different reasons. I can go in depth into why in another video. I'm not going to do it right now. But from the 2010s onwards, especially the top forwards playing for the top teams disproportionately benefited. When you look at the top 20 goal contributors of the 21st century and you adjust for goals per game, Henry is the only one from the 2000s who features at the top end. The next player in the top 20 to have peaked in the 2000s is Totti at 13th. And if you want to look at Premier League stats, it's even more insane. Again, Henry, the only 2000s player near the top. The next one is Van Nistelrooy, who's very far behind. And the only person Henry is trailing is Haaland, and Henry has like 100 times the better all-round game. Like, I'm not even a big like goals and assists stats merchant, especially when people cherry pick. Like, these stats need to be contextualized. But when you're this far ahead of literally everyone in your era for a long period of time, I think that is noteworthy. I think the only reason this isn't more widely known is because I think back then people didn't care or record these stats nearly as much, especially assists, as they do today. Anyway, back to Fabregas. He's also completely right about how even great defenders didn't know what to do with Henry, because there are very few players in history who have such a deep catalog of absolutely ripping apart and destroying like GOAT level defenders like Henry does. He didn't just cause them some trouble with some trickery. He pulled everyone's pants down and spanked them. Like 1v1, he was an actual demon, bro. And this isn't just for like one or two of the great defenders. No, this is for virtually every GOAT level one.
This is the man the Italians say they fear. Is Thierry Henry straight away into the attack.
Like, bro, a 33-year-old physically completely dead Henry was bullying Sergio Ramos. Like, I see some people nowadays saying, oh, I don't know if he could do it against modern defenders. Like, he would completely feast in the modern game. You know what? The thing is though, I personally don't even really care about like quotes from great players and what they say about them, because they can be wrong. I'd rather just watch these players play and make my mind up for myself on how good they are. And since R9 shares a lot of similarities with Henry and is generally considered the best striker, I'm going to focus on comparing to him. In fact, I'd go so far as to say Henry was around about R9's level, possibly even better, and certainly more complete. Now, before anyone kills me, I know questioning R9's supremacy is a lynchable offense. Let me land, okay? I've been watching a ton of both players in recent months, and when I say that, I don't mean edited compilations of their best moments. I mean either full games or all-touch compilations, where you can see their general play, their mistakes, and you get a much better sense of their average level. And in terms of how they impacted games week in, week out, I really don't think there's that much difference between them. Now you may say, well, R9 is clearly way more technically talented, and that's somewhat true. He was more technically talented, especially in tight space dribbling. I mean, he was shorter for one, so it's natural, right? He tended to have more control of the ball in small spaces when defenders were on his ass, and when he ran with it, it was closer to his foot. And just generally, he was more consistent. Henry could be sloppier, especially pre-2004. All that is true. But I think people don't realize Ronaldo had games where he could be quite sloppy himself. Like, I sometimes hear people say, oh, Ronaldo was comparable as a dribbler or technically to Messi, and it's not even close. Maybe aesthetically, or if you only watch comps, it seems that way, but Messi was just cleaner and more consistent. I don't know what to say. That dude is an alien, okay? No one's gonna touch him. I'll put it this way. I've seen far more of Messi's games than R9's, because I watched Messi's entire career, right? And just in researching for this video, I've already seen more stinkers, like mediocre to bad games from Ronaldo, than I think I've ever seen from Messi. And that's not an indictment on Ronaldo, by the way. I've seen more stinkers from Henry too. It's more a comment on just how far ahead Messi is from everyone. I don't get the comparison when people say R9 could have been as good as him. Like, no joke, Henry was much closer to R9 in that respect than R9 was to Messi. Especially once he honed his skills. As a young player, he was very raw technically. His touch could be very, very loose. But once he hit, 25, 26, 27, there was not that much between them. It's not like Henry was some bum in tight spaces. He could wriggle out of tight situations. He ran with the ball close to him as well. Like, I think he was better than Mbappe in those aspects, for example. But I will say he was not as good as R9. However, I've only touched on the technical, pure ball control aspect of dribbling. When it comes to actually beating people though, I don't think there's anything in it at all. Or if there is, it's very minimal and it could go either way. And that's because ultimately, dribbling can only be expressed properly through physicality. Because what is dribbling? Dribbling is simply beating players who can get closer to goal eventually, right? And that is all impacted by the speed you can get to, the balance you have. So for example, part of why Ronaldo was better in tight spaces and on the half turn was because he was shorter, more compact. He had better balance. So he was like a better initiator on the dribble. Ronaldo also had a bit more of a solid foundation. He was a bit stronger in certain situations, which allowed him to like roll a defender or bulldoze through in certain scenarios where Henry probably couldn't. But I think Henry bridged whatever technical or physical gap that exists by being a better athlete and being a bit faster, which meant he was a better ball carrier and dribbler in larger spaces. Now that's going to shock some people because the R9 has this reputation of being like insanely fast and stuff. And look, he was obviously rapid, especially in the first 2-3 yards. But no, he was not as quick as Henry. If you watch like 10 games from these guys, it should become obvious. I mean, it's tough to properly prove this without making you just watch full games. I mean, for example, this clip, R9 is essentially in a race with the Schalke defender, and the defender keeps up with him and eases him off the ball. I think Henry just gets the ball there and wins the race. I don't know what to say. Or hey, we could compare against the same player. Here's R9 against Lilian Thuram. Actually, Thuram in general actually seemed to handle Ronaldo pretty well. I mean, most others seem to really struggle with this freak, but Thuram himself was a beast.
Vieira's header forward. Henry trying to gather it. Thuram looks anxiously over his shoulder. Henry still has it. Muscling Lilian Thuram, of all people, off the ball.
But just look at how much he gains on him in such a short space there.
Well, he certainly looked quicker than him on this run. He gains on Thuram, knocks him down, and then has the audacious cheek.
Man, I'm telling you, no defender in history could live with him when he was on it, man. This guy was an absolute menace.
Control as he hit the volley.
Henry slipping Thuram. Arsenal have got men over here.
Like I understand the conditions aren't exactly the same, so it's tough to do like direct comparisons, but I'm telling you, if you just watch enough, it becomes pretty obvious Henry is quicker. In Henry's case, I think the fact that he's tall and he looks so casual when he's running at times, it maybe skews people's perceptions a bit. But when you watch like extended footage, you realize just how athletically superior he is. He could leave anyone in the dust. Or just look at how he dismisses like Peak Zanetti or Cafu. I mean, these guys were quick themselves, some of the greatest fullbacks of all time. And I don't think R9 quite has that, where he could make someone that quick just look like non-existent. Especially in terms of like long distance sustained speed, it's not even a contest.
Now he can accelerate. What a run here. Oh!
C'est Colin, c'est Legwinski. Thierry Henry va se faire couper. Oh là, il est passé.
The quickest player in the league going to be bearing down on him. The rest of the Tottenham players, they just can't catch up. They can't get him, he's too quick. And again, Henry keeps the ball, And actually, you've got to now give the Arsenal player so much credit because he wriggled past 2 or 3 players there.
So in terms of sheer volume, like who created more with their dribbling, I don't think there's much in it at all. It's just one is better in tighter spaces and one in larger spaces. Actually, I think that extra speed also helped Henry in 1v1 situations on the wing, because he had that ability to just knock it to the byline past anyone and get there, you know?
Alistair has come to meet him. Harley was in the centre, so is Bergkamp. Henry's too quick for them.
I think in general, people tend to overrate a little bit the importance of tight space dribbling. Look, it's absolutely important, but look, a football pitch is big. And at the end of the day, if you're beating a player by just pushing the ball past them or doing an elastico, I mean, what's the difference? It's not like Henry tremendously struggled against low blocks or anything. He could create like these mini transition moments out of nothing. Like in the World Cup final against Italy in 2006, Henry actually penetrated that nasty Italian defense a few times.
Clever turn, injection of pace from Henry. Can he finish here? Slips it through.
Silva sale a pedir la pelota Henry, el francés dentro del área, vaya jugada de Henry, sigue Henry, dentro, cómo lo sacó de ahí, parecía imposible.
Prodigio de técnica y de potencia a la vez.
In terms of dribbling, like their skill set just shone a little bit more in slightly different situations. Like Henry was overall a better ball carrier over distance, like just bringing you up the pitch, whereas Ronaldo was better as like a one-man counterattack in the final third. Henry was a bit better 1v1 on the wing, whereas Ronaldo was better exploding in central areas and also in and around the box in congested spaces. Now obviously this all overlaps as well. Like, they were both great at everything I just listed. But yeah. Okay, let's talk about back to goal play, holding off defenders when a ball is played to you, finding a way to keep it, protect it, maybe even turn and progress.
Henry held it up well, but also at his back, nibbling.
Something vital to every striker. I think Ronaldo was better at this, and quite clearly so. I think all that stuff about being like a compact, stocky, shorter player helps, especially when it was rolled to him on the ground. In the air, I think there was more parity. Henry might even edge it there. Also, I think Henry didn't relish physical battles as much, but he could do it at a pretty high level. He was not absolutely elite. He wasn't Drogba. Like, don't get me wrong, Henry was really strong. He had a very good back-to-goal game, but against like the very elite defenders, it was in these situations, especially in his younger days, where his touch could be the most loose as well. I'm showing you good examples because that's what I recorded, but just take my word for it. Actually, here you go. This is what it could often look like, especially in his younger days. Just quite sloppy. And even when he got better at it, his touch was just not as secure as Ronaldo's when he had pressure on his back. Like even in this example, when he holds off the Man United defenders and bursts past them, his touch was a little dodgy, you know? Like on a scale of Mbappe to Drogba, Henry would be closer to Drogba than Mbappe. Like he could certainly have games or like moments where he was like, incredible back to goal, but the consistency wasn't quite there. It just wasn't really his game. It wasn't what he was best suited for. He was a converted winger after all. Ronaldo invited and seemed to enjoy contact a lot more. In fact, you know, people focus so much on his dribbling and his skills. His back-to-goal game might be a little bit underrated. He was so strong, you know, he was like a bull. Whereas Henry, I think he preferred to avoid defenders and avoid contact. He liked using his mobility, drag defenders, and then explode into spaces. In fact, I think Ledley King talked about this recently.
Henry was the best striker for me.
Go on, why?
Drifts all over the pitch. Love that out on the left wing. You can't go out there. When he comes inside, gets ahead of steam, he's dribbling. That's a problem for you.
Ronaldo played more as a central focal point, and he was better at doing that as well. Okay, I say Henry didn't like contact, but when it comes to like shoulder-to-shoulder stuff, he was unbelievable. Every bit as good as Ronaldo, maybe even a bit better. I mean, he could compete with absolutely anyone. I mean, he bundled over Desai, Thuram, like I already showed. I mean, he absolutely ragdolled Sergio Ramos. Even at 33 years old, he was bullying that guy. Henry was weird, because even with headers, like he was famously poor in the air, right? But that's actually kind of false in some ways. He was actually incredible in the air.
For Arsenal at the moment. And Nistelrooy's there again. Henry heads away.
He had a huge leap. He could win flick-ons. He just sucked at directing it goalwards, and he just wasn't in the box very much. I mean, look at this guy. Look at some of these jumps. This is Michael Jordan.
He can spring as good as anyone I've seen, Thierry Henry. 6 foot plus. Great physique.
Biggest talent ever maybe in football. Had everything you dream to have when you're a football player. Highly intelligent, great pace, great power, great jump. He used only 50% of his jumping power to score goals because he could have been a tremendous header of the ball. He didn't fancy it too much, but he had aspects in his game that he didn't explore completely, you know.
I legit think between about 2001 to 2004, Henry might be the best like pure athlete football has ever seen. It just allowed him to create like these weird angles and situations that no one else could. And because of that, even though his pure like back to goal game was a little bit lacking, or at least wasn't elite, as a long ball outlet, I still think he was excellent because he would always just find a yard, get away from his defender, and then he could use his physicality. Look at some of the stuff he'd do, like a flying chest to flick it around the corner in one smooth motion.
Vestre vers Henry.
Oh là là! Oh là là! Qu'est-ce qu'il vient de nous faire? Oh! Et but!
This is what I mean when I say he was a better athlete than Ronaldo. That dude wasn't doing stuff like this. All right, playmaking, making your team tick, creating chances, shifting the opposition defense around, breaking it down. This was something I think Henry was just pretty clearly superior at. His range of passing, his variety, I think he had more of a playmaker's brain. He could hit Trivelas, he could switch the play with such ease. He used to do it with his weak foot as well, like these raking 40-yard balls. It was this strangest skill that he just had locked down for some reason. R9 had a bit of tunnel vision at times. He would just try and bulldoze through, especially during his physical peak. Now I understand why, he had so much individual ability, but he would sometimes ignore like open passing lanes, and especially in his year at Barca, his passing could be quite hit and miss at times. This is a weakness that people don't really highlight much about him. There were times where I would be watching and I'd be quite frustrated, like, bro, pass the ball. And to be honest, I could sense that frustration from his teammates at times as well. Now, I don't want to make it sound like he never had an eye for a pass or he was garbage or something, because that's not true. Especially as he got older, his decision-making improved, he became a half-decent playmaker. And there were times where he could pick up some really nice passes. But he was generally less involved in the play, and he generated fewer chances for his teammates. I think the one thing R9 had over Henry was he had like these little 1-2s around the corner little moves, where he would like play off his teammates. But even that, it felt like it was more to service himself. Like he would do that 1-2 so he could get it and like burst past that last line of defense. Whereas Henry, I think, was just more rounded as a playmaker. It didn't have to be him doing the final action. He could do the pre-assist. He could even just come and help with build-up. Although I'm acting like he was amazing at this throughout his career. I mean, his passing could be a bit wayward at times as well. His playmaking was always pretty good and it was gradually improving, but it got to an insane level around 2004-2005. In fact, I don't think he gets enough credit for how good a playmaker he was. He wasn't quite like Neymar, Ronaldinho, or Fabregas or something, but he wasn't a million miles away either. He may not have had their technical level, but his vision and also the angles he'd create, just because of his athleticism and his flair, was crazy. And he had so much variety to his game. He could take up all sorts of different positions. He could play make through his dribbling or just through his off-the-ball movement. You only really get the sense when you watch a lot of his full games. It was really like he had an unlimited amount of ways to cause damage.
I can't ever recall, Des, ever seen a striker that makes as many chances for other front players as this fella does.
All round, Henry was a better playmaker. Okay, I was going to end this section here, but the more I've watched, it actually becomes insane how many chances this guy creates. And it's weird because he's not what you'd consider a typical great playmaker. You know, Zidane, Messi, Rui Costa, Kevin De Bruyne. And I've talked about his athleticism a lot, but it's genuinely nuts just how much he created almost solely through his athletic ability. It just gave him like this range of influence that I just don't think Ronaldo ever had. Man, make him sound like just a sprinter. No, he could like pull the strings around of an attack almost better than any striker I've ever seen. Maybe only Benzema's better. And he was so clever, Henry. He's so full of imagination. His speed of thought, his feeling for the game was incredible. But really, it was the athleticism that took his playmaking even to another level. Again, just that sense of like people were scared to get near him, or the angles he'd create just because of how he could move his body.
Wonderful bit of skill and pace and control by Thierry Henry. He's in the mood tonight.
It's funny, even Wenger says he first started Henry at Monaco, not because of his blindingly obvious talent, but because he thought, man, this guy creates chances.
I met him in Monaco when he was 17 and a half years old because I saw him play with the youth team and I thought this guy creates chances. He was a bit technically average at the start because he missed many chances. When he was a young boy, of course, he was so much quicker than everybody else, but I thought just he had something special. I made him start at the age of 17. He looked rusty, a bit off the pace of a game at the time, but I thought this guy will make a career.
Out of all the categories so far, this is the one where there's the clearest difference. Like Henry is pretty far ahead playmaking wise over R9, which is why I said at the beginning he's more complete. Like Ronaldo would pretty regularly go a full 90 minutes without creating anything of note for his teammates. That was just not the case for Henry. Even when he was having a quiet game, he would inevitably create something. I think that's something that has maybe become more clear as this video has gone on, is Ronaldo was just much more of a pure striker than Henry was. And maybe Henry shouldn't be considered one at all. He was more of just a general forward.
If you watch games, I was never in the middle. Well, not never in the middle, but I was everywhere. Not a 9. I was a forward.
Look, Ronaldo was very mobile as well, and he didn't just stay in the box or anything, but for the most part he was central, and his main thing was, how can I get to goal and score? I think Ronaldo sort of evolved maybe like what you think of as possible for a striker to be, whereas Henry, I think, sort of revolutionized forwards as a whole. I think it's actually weirdly understated just how much he changed what it even means to be a forward. Henry kind of merged that, you know, striker slash playmaker slash winger dribbly guy that the likes of Salah and Neymar and Cristiano Ronaldo and even Messi to some extent would embody later on. Okay, how many players in the big clubs in the last 30 years have been their team's main goal scorer, main chance creator, and the main ball progressor as well? I legitimately can only think of Messi and Neymar. Even Neymar had Mbappe next to him banging them in. Ronaldinho had Samuel Eto'o. I'm telling you, people need to put more respect on this guy, man. The individual ability, like the peak level he got to was off the charts. It was crazy. It was the most like one-man attack I've ever seen.
In your opinion, how has the role of a forward or winger evolved in the last decade, and who in your eyes was the ideal one?
In my opinion, it changed a lot last few years. Now it's like the wingers now score more goals. I would say Thierry Henry was the one, but he was like still kind of a striker, but he got to always in left side.
Anyway, let's get to another category where I think R9 does win, and that's finishing. Now, I don't have XG conversion stats for or anything, but I think Ronaldo was better. Henry was not a natural finisher. It took him until his mid-20s before he became like world-class at it, I think. Even then, I always felt there were strikers more clinical than him. You know, a Van Nistelrooy, a Samuel Eto'o. In recent years, someone like Aguero or Harry Kane. Of course, he had that finesse shot on lock. That was unbelievable. And as he aged, the other finishes came too. I think he became really deadly around the age of 28, 29 onwards. But before then, if there was one weakness in his game, it was probably his finishing, which sounds mad to say considering how much he scored, but yeah. I wouldn't say Ronaldo was clear. He could miss too. For example, he missed 2 absolute sitters at the World Cup final before eventually scoring. But I do think he was a slightly better finisher. He had a better feel for it. He could smash it from different angles, both feet as well, lower backlift, rounding the keeper he was unbelievable at. Henry had all this too, but just not as good. Where I do think Henry was better was ball striking from distance and some of the inventive shots he would take. I mean, have a look at this.
Dégagement de Marcel Desailly, la tête de Marlet, très bon contrôle. Oh, il frappe de loin, il a vu avancer.
The back heel against Charlton, the flick volley against Man United. And that wasn't a fluke at all because he tried something very similar a year later against Juventus.
Vieira quickly taken. Henry taken on the chest. What a volley! Oh!
Like goal catalog wise, it's not even a contest. Like Henry clears Ronaldo by a mile. Like Henry's competing with Suarez and Zlatan as the player with the best goal catalog outside of Messi and Cristiano. Even his like almost goal catalog is crazy too.
Turn to threaten once more with Henry. Oh! Now how far out was that? That's got to be about 40.
Like he just had the confidence to try all sorts of things. He had a period where he could do absolutely anything.
You find a new adjective for him. He is just extraordinary. Nothing is impossible. And Thierry Henry is on the ball.
Perez. Henry! Oh, nearly!
So long-range strikes, I think Henry takes it. Free kicks, I don't think it's even close. Henry has way more. He has about like 50 goals that nobody even knows about that are absolutely unreal. Like his ratio of goals to good goals is crazy. Like he's an anti-tapping merchant. And people would say like, man, this guy does not score a bad goal.
Does he ever score a bad goal? Thierry Henry, they all seem to be things of beauty.
If he got a few tap-ins, God knows how many he'd score, because he rarely gets them.
So to summarize, I'd say R9 was a more technical dribbler, more technically sound in general. He was better back to goal, he was a better finisher, but Henry was a bit faster, a better athlete, a better winger. I think he was a better ball carrier over distance as well, a much better playmaker, and he had better ball striking from distance, was generally just more of a threat in different positions, whereas R9 was more of that pure killer striker. Henry was also a harder worker, by the way. Ronaldo, low-key, kind of lazy. I simply don't think there's a clear winner here on who would just blanket give more value to a team. I really don't. So having said all that, why is Ronaldo rated so much higher by other people? Now, I could talk about Henry's legacy for ages. I think there's a lot of funny nuances there. I think his reputation tanked quite a fair bit in the late 2000s and early 2010s for a lot of different reasons. I'll go into it in another video. But back to him in R9, I think there's a few things. Ronaldo was undoubtedly more prodigious. He was a freak at a young age. At 20 years old, he was the best player in the world. Henry was not that. I think people just prefer natural talent, whatever the hell that means. Actually, I'll tell you what it means. It means getting to a high level at a younger age and having the ball closer to your foot when you dribble. That's what natural means. It's a bit similar to how Foden is treated compared to Saka. Even though they're similar level players right now, I sense there's always a feeling for a lot of people of like, but actually Foden is better. He just needs to unlock it or show it, you know? I mean, in Saka's case, it's even worse. Like, Henry, at least, even to the casual eye, was so obviously ridiculously good. Saka doesn't quite have that. Pundits seem to always want to move Saka out of the England team or move him to left back or something to fit in Palmer and Foden. Despite being similar level players, if not Saka being even better, it's Foden who gets all the fancy individual awards and all the crazy fancy quotes from legends and stuff.
So, Saka and Foden.
See, over Williams and Yamal. I'm not getting involved in this.
No way. Phil has to be in there. Just the way he plays.
I'd have Foden in there. Over who? I'm going Foden. Yeah, I love Foden in there.
Like immediately, without thought, without debate, Foden has to be in. Just the way he plays, apparently. It does my head in. Even his own teammates seem to rate Foden more.
I'm going to go with Phil number 1.
Foden 1.
Okay, you're going Cole Palmer 2.
And you're going Saka in 3.
I know.
He's going to hate me for this as well, but...
Okay, so why am I talking about those two? Saka, like Henry, took time to develop. His talent wasn't quite as obvious. It takes Saka more performances to prove, like, no, I'm at that level, by the way. I think R9 and Henry had a similar thing, basically. There's a subconscious thing where people begrudged the fact that they got to a level that they weren't expected to. Like, Henry was seen as a potentially, like, world-class talent, but people didn't think he would become this monster, like one of the best players of all time and, like, a best player in the world level. And there's a sense that people want to drag him back to what he was expected to be, rather than accept what he actually became. And how people even define what talent is, I think is very flawed. Like, some people still want to say that Anelka was a bigger talent than Henry. No, he wasn't. He was better when they were both 18. That's it. Like, Henry unlocked levels and abilities that Anelka never showed that he was ever capable of.
Biggest talent ever, maybe. In football, had everything you dream to have when you're a football player.
And Wenger really was the one who fully understood what Henry was and what he could be.
There's such a huge potential, and sometimes I feel that it is too easy for him.
What's too easy for him?
Football.
I think I heard you mention him, that he could be Michael Jordan of football.
Yes. He had everything.
Unbelievable.
But I think there's an even bigger reason that Ronaldo's legacy eclipses Henry's. And that's because he has the clout that comes with spending your entire prime in bigger and more glamorous clubs. Barcelona, Inter Milan, and then even after his knees got shot, Real Madrid. These clubs do give you extra PR compared to Arsenal. I'm sorry, that's just true. It's why Cristiano wanted to move to Real Madrid, even from Man United, which are a bigger club and even more glamorous than Arsenal are. I mean, this dude absolutely knew that if he wants to win multiple Ballon d'Ors over and over again, if he wants that next level PR, then he needs to go to Real Madrid or Barcelona. I mean, just look at Magnus Carlsen, right? He talks about when Real Madrid interviewed him. He's a fan of the club, right? He was asked, who was your favorite player? And they basically pressured him to say Cristiano Ronaldo, even though he wasn't.
I always liked Ronaldo, but I always kind of thought that Messi was better. And I went to quite a number of Madrid games, and they've always been super helpful to me down there. The only thing is that they were going to do an interview and they were going to ask me who my favorite player was. And I said somebody else. I think I said Isco at that point. And I was like, okay, take two. Now you say Ronaldo. So for them, it was very important.
As an institution, like, those types of clubs just know how to play the PR game. They have that stature and they just know how to build legacies, how to affect stories, how to... I mean, just look at the fuss they made when Vinicius didn't win the Ballon d'Or. They're trying to put pressure on journalists. They know what they're doing. Like, I remember Johan Cruyff and Platini saying, basically, Henry made a mistake by staying at Arsenal for so long. Like, he needs to move now if he wants to secure himself as one of the best players of all time. I mean, here, Platini says, Henry is a truly great player. However, he hasn't reached the same category as other great stars because he lacks playing in a great team. That's harsh, but I think there's some truth to it. I mean, purely selfishly, for his own legacy, I think he should have gone to Barca like 3-4 years earlier.
He was someone who should have come to Barcelona sooner than he did. That's something I have to say. It would have been much better had he come in earlier.
But I think Henry, kind of like Wenger, was obsessed with growing the club and bringing the Champions League to Arsenal. Anyway, World Cups is another big factor that separates them, because that tournament, especially back then, was massive for your legacy. It would do wonders for your career. And Ronaldo was the absolute face of Brazil for a couple of World Cups. And that's something Henry never really got to be. Zidane was the talisman, the face of France. I will say, France at that time was built horribly. This was an all-timer team, and they were successful, but they didn't maximize their talents. The structure essentially just relied on Zidane to be the conductor and make them play. Even that, and I'm working on another video about Henry and his international career. I think Henry was incredible in Euro 2000. I think he was also low-key very good in 2006. Not so much in the group stage, and round of 16 against Spain, he was not good, but from the quarterfinal onwards, I think he was excellent. Very underrated tournament from Henry, and very underrated from Vieira as well. He was also a monster. I will say, I think a few French players suffered a little bit under the shadow of Zidane, both his PR and just the way he played the game. Which sounds weird to say because I know he was so good and he was like so important to some of their success. But there's some truth to what I'm saying.
Exceptional. He won everything. He won the World Cup final. He lost the World Cup final on penalties. He won the European Championship, where he was by far the best player for France in 2000 in Belgium and Holland. And his international career was outstanding. He was, in my opinion, a bit in the shadow of Zidane, who took all the glory in the French team. but you look at his record and what he has achieved, it is absolutely exceptional.
So basically, his legacy kind of suffers because he was never like the clear main protagonist of a major tournament. The one time he was the 2003 Confederations Cup, where he was unbelievable. He carried France to that. But even that got a little bit upstaged by the death of a Cameroonian player, and of course, it's not the biggest trophy. You could argue he deserved player of the tournament in Euro 2000, but Zidane was there. So people started noting like, oh, he's not been as important for France as he has been for Arsenal, and he doesn't play the same style. And then they started twisting that over time to basically say he was bad for France, which is unbelievably stupid. Oh, and this can't be emphasized enough, by the way. Henry was France's best player in both the Euro 2000 final and the World Cup 2006 final against Italy, by an absolute mile as well. He was the only one who looked capable of breaking down that insane Italian defense.
Henry is the one person here on the French side who looks as though he's got enough artillery to trouble the Italians.
In fact, the Euro 2000 final is part of why I rate Henry so highly. There are not many players in history, and over the last 30 years, I don't know if there are any who could do what he did to those defenders. I mean, this was Nesta and Cannavaro, and he made them look so pedestrian, so hapless. Like, I'm trying to think who could have been that roaming outlet, wing-playing, ball-carrying monster and do that many positive actions in one game against the best defenders of all time. Yeah, Messi maybe, R9 maybe, but someone like Suarez, who I think is incredible, he was just not capable of this. But no one remembers that, especially the 2006 final, because of Zidane's Panenka, Zidane's headbutt. This was Zizou's last dance, his touches against Brazil. This whole World Cup was about him. People were blinded by narrative so much they ignored his less than stellar performances, and they ignored some of his all-timer teammates, which I think is a little unfair. Again, I'll go into like the nuances of his France stuff in another video because there's a lot to unpack there. So yeah, his international career, even though I think he was excellent for France and he won so much, he was so successful, it did harm his legacy in a way just because it's like something's missing, something's not quite right. Which brings me to Henry's finals record is also something that hurts his legacy. It just makes it feel like his career is missing an exclamation mark. A bit like Neymar as well. Low-key, those two have some similarities, but I think Henry actually played really well in most of the finals. Again, that's a separate video. I'm going to work on something in depth for that. I'll go through every single final and break it down. Okay, now bear with me through this next section. I might sound a little bit delusional and narcissistic, but I promise I'm not a schizo. I think another huge reason for their discrepancy in legacy is I think Ronaldo has just had much better YouTube compilations made of him. It's why I even made this channel. I remember what forced my hand was a Reddit thread about Mbappe versus Henry. And people were saying like, oh, Mbappe is definitely better and he's definitely way faster. So I just made like a few compilations of just Henry's speed, and all of them went super viral. Like all of them got over 1 million views on YouTube, but a lot of those clips started getting reposted, I noticed, on TikTok, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And I know they were my clips because they had like my aspect ratio and they had my little activate window sign in the bottom right. And across the platforms, these clips got like tens of millions more views. And I shit you not, I think me making those compilations actually changed an entire generation's view of Henry's speed. I know that makes me sound like I think I'm way more important than I probably am, but I'm not joking. I saw in real time the perceptions change slowly, like of just how many people were aware of how fast he was. The younger generation legitimately did not seem to know. Okay, and now I'm gonna really sound delusional because I did the exact same thing with the Euro 2000 final. I'm sure a lot of you have seen clips from that, but before I even uploaded a compilation on YouTube, I made one on Reddit like 5 years ago. It blew up there and it started getting picked up on Twitter by other accounts, and then by like Sports Bible and TikTok and all that. Again, it's got like millions of views across these platforms, and then suddenly only then did people seem to know like, oh, he actually had a good game for France in a big game. Anyway, I'm not just saying this just to glaze myself to be like, oh yeah, I dick sucked Henry so well, now people know how good he is. It's to make the point that narratives are actually shaped by so many small little insignificant things, what seem like insignificant things, that can snowball a lot over time. 1 or 2 different people making like good compilations can make a world of difference to a player's legacy. I'm not kidding. Especially if like certain false narratives start to build. If you don't nip it in the bud, it can be really hard to like unwind and untangle them later on. And you may think like, oh, knowledgeable pundits and footballers and analysts are immune from this kind of thing. They're absolutely not. You think those guys don't watch YouTube, they're not on social media, that they aren't influenced by broader culture as a whole? Of course they are. By the way, very few people, including pundits, do actual research when they talk about stuff, about like judging players. They don't go and watch games and stuff. It's all based on vibes and narratives. Maybe they played against one guy once, that kind of thing. And I think those vibes can be controlled by a surprisingly low amount of people. Unironically, like YouTube editors and compilation makers and stuff are super powerful. Again, it's just to make the point, I think for ages, R9 just had better comps made, and yes, I do think that makes a big difference. I think something else that might actually strangely benefit Ronaldo is the, oh, but what if he didn't have injuries factor. I feel like that factor makes people concoct a version of a player that didn't actually exist. Like, of course, he would have been better if he didn't get injured, but I feel like people run a little bit far with that narrative. It's like if I say Abu Dhabi could have been better than Vieira if he never got injured. And yeah, maybe that's even true, but I can't use that to then say, well, Diaby is actually better than Vieira. That's crazy. And to some extent, a much lesser extent, mind you, you could apply that injury logic to Henry too. I mean, sure, his knees didn't explode, but he did have like bad chronic Achilles issues. This wasn't widely reported at the time, but I've been doing some digging. And I found some interviews where he basically says like, yeah, I can't sprint. I'm like at 70% of my capacity right now. And by watching those games, you can tell he was less explosive from about mid-2004 onwards. I mean, he was only 26 when this started. So we missed out on Henry marrying like his technical peak with his physical peak. We didn't get to see that. Another big one I often hear is, oh, but he couldn't win the Champions League with Arsenal. And it's like, I'm just thinking, how many players have properly carried a team to a Champions League win? Like throughout the whole campaign, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 at the most. Like maybe Gerrard, and Benzema's the closest, I think. Even then, he's playing for Real Madrid, you know? He's got Vinicius and Modric. Even Messi, think of his Champions League wins. He always had all-timer GOAT level players next to him. Henry himself, Eto'o, Xavi, Iniesta, Neymar, Suarez. If he had an off day, you know, someone else would step up. Henry simply did not have that luxury. I don't think people realize how much Henry had to carry Arsenal between about 03 to 06. If Henry didn't do some superhuman stuff, Arsenal would just crash out.
Lleva toda la temporada siendo medio Arsenal, realmente. Si Henry se viene abajo, el Arsenal se viene abajo. Si Henry es el mejor Henry, el Arsenal es un equipo difícilmente ganable y la desgracia para el Arsenal es que Henry no apareció en la semifinal de la Champions.
Iba a decir, no le he visto todos los partidos al Arsenal esta temporada, pero casi todos. Y solo le he visto 2 malos a Henry. Los 2 contra el Chelsea en Liga de Campeones y fuera.
Por eso estamos hablando.
By the way, that commentary is after he scored that incredible hat-trick to save the Invincibles against Liverpool. I think that Chelsea tie in 04 probably cost him the Ballon d'Or. I think Henry is the only player I've seen get this much crap for not single-handedly winning the competition, essentially. And yeah, he had great teammates, but most of them actually peaked earlier. Bergkamp was very much aging, and famously didn't even travel in Europe. Perez was still great, but not quite the same after his ACL injury. Ljungberg was not the force he was in 02. Even Vieira was on the decline a bit, and the depth of that team was awful. Like, okay, no disrespect, but Arsenal had players like Pascal Sigon having to come into way too many important matches and moments, or Almunia in goal. These guys were barely Premier League level players. They're being asked to play against Europe's elite. And the thing is, Henry almost did get them there as well with a very poor team. Ronaldo never even came close. I mean, he never got to the Champions League final with all the great teams he played for. Like, try to name Arsenal's big Champions League nights, like great victories they had in the competition, that doesn't have Henry starring in them. There's maybe like a handful, if that even. I can only think of really 2 off the top of my head. Oh, there's another false narrative that people use to try and bring him down. There's this weird idea that the Premier League was a trash league in the 2000s, which is just not true. It was firmly a top 3 league, that was inarguable, and it was very close to being the best. Like, you could make arguments for why it might be the best. By 2003-04, it had a better coefficient than Serie A, and in my opinion had surpassed it. And there's even lag in coefficient, remember that. And from about 2004, when Abramovich bought Chelsea, and then Mourinho and Benitez and Wenger and Ferguson were all in the Premier League, I think that was the strongest league in the world by a fair margin. They started to clean up Europe from about 2004 to 2009. And that didn't happen overnight. Anyone who was astute could see it coming. I don't know where this narrative that Serie A was so superior back then comes from. Like, if anything, La Liga was the best from about 2000 to 2004. I don't know why people cling to the Serie A this, Serie A that. And the funny thing is, Henry actually almost always played really well against the Italian teams as well. Some people back then, a lot of journalists especially, held on to its reputation of being the top dog too long. Again, in the internet era, perceptions would be way different because things just move quicker today. Yeah, so I've given a bunch of reasons why I think Henry's underrated. And it's not just legacy, he was a bit underrated even while he played. Like, famously, he never won the Ballon d'Or, right? But that has only compounded over time. And some of the conversations, some of the comparisons and debates I see him put in these days, it's so disrespectful to the player he was. My goal with this video is to basically see Henry in conversations that he belongs in. Like, if someone says Henry is in my top 10 all time, or top 5, top 3 even, I don't think that should be like an outrageous opinion. I think it should be debatable and very arguable. I truly believe if he came up in the social media era, he would be getting GOAT shouts. Because as well, you need to keep in mind the way we perceive football has changed. Like, the fact that Salah versus Hazard is even a debate today, and a lot of people are leaning towards Salah now, just shows how it's changed. Like, in the 2000s, it wouldn't even be a contest. Like, everyone would say Hazard was better. Because aesthetic qualities and how natural you look on the ball overall was just rated far higher back then. I mean, Henry, of course, passes the eye test with flying colors, but again, he just doesn't look quite as natural as someone like Ronaldo or Ronaldinho, even though he dribbles past players just as much, if not more than them. By the way, I low-key think Ronaldinho might actually be better than both Henry and Ronaldo, but that's a debate for another day. My point is, all these players are close enough that it should be like debatable. Also, I think Henry's stats and his skill set would translate so well today. Oh, like some of the high lines I see today, like he would demolish them, my lord. Anyway, yeah, I've rambled and ranted for long enough. Henry's underrated, okay? That's basically my point. I'll just say this, I've never seen a more consistent, pure threat on a football pitch other than Messi. Like, those two were the best in my lifetime of just picking up the ball in situations where it seems like there's no danger whatsoever and just somehow creating something. Messi was the best by far at this, but I think Henry is second. I can't think of anyone else better. It's like if you make a weird fusion mix of Neymar, Mbappe, and Harry Kane, you know? He's not the most underrated player of all time or anything. He's widely recognized as great and he gets that Premier League GOAT label. But yeah, I just find it strange that there's such an apprehension to compare him to other all-timers like Ronaldo or whatever, you know? How can you be the consensus best player by far of one of the best leagues? You have seasoned defenders saying not only was he the best, but they made him feel like they couldn't compete with him.
Actually, I played against a few of these players and, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo, what he went on to do, I played against Drogba, Wayne Rooney, a little bit Shearer at the end. But in the main, you had good games against them, or they had good games against you, but it was a battle. Thierry is the one player on that list who made me feel completely inferior, that I couldn't cope really going into the games. I'd never felt like that before about coming up against a player.
Thierry Henry would definitely be the toughest I played against. Used to have nightmares before I played against him. So by far the best.
And he had a ton of flair, it was fun to watch, and he was super consistent, and he won everything. He literally changed what it means to be a forward. His skill set, his profile would translate to any era, any team, but somehow it's like outrageous to say he's a top 5 player or something like that, you know? I don't get it, man. Alright, if you made it this far, please like, subscribe, all that jazz. Put your arguments in the comments if you want to argue with me, that's fine. Just try to not make it like lazy and stupid, okay? Like, I put a lot of effort into this. I've done a lot of research. Show some respect, okay? Oh, check out my Twitter. I post a lot of compilations out there, don't make it to YouTube. On the screen right now, I list a couple of other like YouTube channels and Twitter accounts who post a lot of good like Henry content. I want to be more active here. I have a few other like Henry legacy stuff and misinformation to debunk and all that stuff to go over. I think I'll eventually expand into like other realms, like broader Arsenal or like other football content related stuff. Yeah, eventually. I'll be traveling for the next couple of weeks, but after that, okay, just push the bell icon or whatever, you know, so you get notified. And yeah, that's it. See ya.